On today's show, have the Houston Rockets started to figure out the Golden State Warriors? What needs to happen in Game 6 for the Rockets to extend the series to a 7th game back home in Houston? It's all coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Thursdays. Be sure to follow along wherever you listen to your podcasts or on YouTube. Just search Locked On Rockets, where the best way you can help us grow our show is to listen every single day on a podcast platform of your choosing and like, comment, subscribe on YouTube. Would sincerely appreciate all of that support. Now, today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off of your first year. And as always, thanks so much for making Locked On Rockets part of your day every single day, whether it's on your way to work, on your lunch break, in the gym, ahead of the pivotal Game 6 to decide the Houston Rockets season. Thank you so much for being an everydayer. Joining us now is your weekly co-host, the podfather himself, Rockets Wire editor and host of the Logger Line podcast, Ben DuBose. You can track down on Blue Sky at Ben DuBose. He's Blue Sky Ben now. Ben, the Rockets are not hashtag Blue Sky Ben. There we go. Got to get that included in there. Look, Rockets are not dead yet, Ben. Going down 3-1 doesn't ever feel good, but they took care of business, protected home court in Game 5. Now the series shifts back out to the Bay. We got a lot to get into on today's episode, but just kind of how are you feeling about where this series is at now, down 3-2, shifting things back out to Golden State's home turf?
Cautiously optimistic. I think they're underdogs for a reason to win 3 straight games against a team like Golden State that has big names like Steph Curry, Jimmy Butler, Draymond Green. It's going to be tough. But I think what gives me the most comfort, it's not just that the Rockets won Game 5, it's the way they won it convincingly. Because really, ever since the midway point of Game 1, when they went down 20 early in the third quarter, and basically, I think the Rockets falling behind by that much in the opening game was a lot to do with inexperience and a little bit to do with rust, because we know they didn't have anything to play for down the home stretch of the regular season with the 2 seed locked up. Ever since the midway point of the third quarter in Game 1, the Rockets have either been in control of these games or they've been very close. Even Game 1 ended up being a coin flip. The Rockets were down 3 with 6 minutes left. And Game 3 and Game 4 in San Francisco, the Rockets had leads midway through the fourth quarter of both of those games. Now, they weren't able to close the deal, and perhaps it's fitting if that ends up being the reason they don't win this series, because the Warriors have at least 2 alphas in Steph and Jimmy. The Rockets don't have the consistent alpha just yet. We've talked about it all season long. Perhaps it's appropriate that ends up biting the Rockets in the playoffs. But there's also a counter in that, Daryl Morey, former GM of the Rockets, had that quote that good teams don't win close games, they avoid them. Well, the Warriors aren't able, or haven't been able at least, to beat the Rockets convincingly. When Golden State has gotten wins in this series, it's been close. All the coin flip games have gone their way. Maybe they're due to lose one of them. Maybe with the schedule getting to where games are every other day now, your veterans like Steph, like Jimmy, that have these nagging injuries, maybe that's becoming more of a factor. Steph scoring below 20 points in back-to-back games, Game 4 and Game 5. First time that's happened since May of 2018. Certainly, the Rockets are doing some things well defensively. Amen Thompson as the head of the snake, Ime Udoka put it. But I just think when you look at the macro of the series and not just the micro, the Rockets have shown an ability, especially at home, and that's why I like their chances if it gets to a Game 7. Ever since the midway point of Game 1, the Rockets have dominated the games in Houston. When Golden State has won those 2 games in San Francisco and then them holding on in Game 1, it's been very close. It's been a coin flip game that Steph just happened to land the plane, or I guess Jimmy landed the plane in Game 4. And again, maybe that ends up being the difference in this series. It's something that's happened a lot in NBA history, but I don't go into Friday night thinking the Rockets are overmatched or likely to be blown out. They're likely to have a shot. There's nothing from this series, by the way, through 5 games, even though the Rockets have just won 2 of the 5, they have the better net rating for a reason. They have outplayed the Warriors in the aggregate. It's just being able to close out the close games. They haven't done it yet. Perhaps they're due, but at a bare minimum, I think the Rockets will go into the fourth quarter Friday night with a chance. If they somehow win it, I do like their chances in a home game 7. I mean, you consider where they were a couple of days ago, how we felt down 3-1. Having a chance feels pretty good.
I was down bad 31. I'll be completely honest with you. I was
Same.
in shambles. And against this team, like 3-1 against any other team would have kind of been, yeah, this sucks, whatever. But 3-1 against the Warriors brought back some dark days for, I'm guessing you, for me,
Yep.
for many Rockets fans everywhere. We were like, having those PTSD flashbacks. I agree with your sentiment. I think my thing is here, I feel like the biggest element at play for the Rockets is, we've heard it from the players. We heard it from Ime. We're literally seeing it on the floor is they are the younger team. They are the inexperienced team. It definitely feels like they are settling into the series. And for me, I don't want to say that I'm not going to say they figured out the Warriors, but even just in game 5, like their offensive approach just felt so much more polished than it had in any game prior. And maybe you chalk some of that up to the Warriors and kind of their indifference about, we'll fold this game. We'll take it in 6 and, go back to the Bay and finish it off on our home court, whatever. Kind of that weird mentality that Kerr had. He talked about it before the game. And then, even after the game about when he was going to pull his starters and all this stuff. But just watching the way that the Rockets attacked, right? They attacked a lot quicker. They got their actions started earlier in the shot clock. They were expecting the different things that the Warriors defense was throwing at them, right? Like watching Jalen and Fred navigate the pick and roll, or watching how Alperen Sengun was going to attack when it was Draymond on him versus a switch with somebody else. Like they're understanding when and where they can be effective on the offensive side of the floor. And that's been their biggest issue is, getting high quality offensive possessions and then converting on them, right? Like actually scoring. Because it's not like games 1 through 4, they just were, a dumpster fire offensively. They had some open looks. They had some opportunities to convert that they just weren't capitalizing on. And in game 5, it's like they opened the floodgates and just every shot went in. But it was also, I think, the quality of the shot and the process of getting to those shots that looked significantly better. Watching Amen Thompson get paint touches and kick it out to open shooters, watching guys make the extra pass from good shots to great shots, different things that across the board led to such a dominant game 5 performance.
Yeah, and I thought it started in the fourth quarter of game 4 when Amen had that sequence where I think he had 3 or 4 buckets in a row going downhill. It felt like that he was starting to figure it out offensively. And really from a Houston perspective, that's the story of this series. And if they ultimately lose, it may come back to the fact that it just took Amen a little too long to get going. And because of that, they let some games, game 1, game 3, game 4, that were otherwise winnable slip away. It's interesting to watch the national coverage because there's so much focus on Jalen Green, and he is important. But for a lot of people that don't watch the Rockets, they identify Jalen more as the guy because he's the leading scorer and because he's been in the NBA longer. But if you watch the Rockets closely, and I think the Rockets themselves view the team this way, Amen is more important than Jalen is. They have viewed internally Amen as a star-level player already. We can talk about developing into a superstar, and I hope he does. I think he can. But even in year 2, the Rockets themselves, inside the building at Toyota Center, they view him as a star-level player already. They believe that's what he did this season and what he's capable of Friday night in game 6, in any of these games, even against high-level opponents. And let's just be blunt, Jackson. For the first 3 games of this series, he was bad. So it's very difficult to put together a formula to beat a really good team if a guy you view internally as a star player is not playing like a star. That's just the cold, hard truth. And nationally, it flew a little bit below the radar because, Jalen's a little bit of a bigger name. He's a leading scorer. There's also this huge split between what he did in the game 2 win and scoring in single digits in the 3 losses. So he sort of became the storyline for TNT and entities like that. But for the Rockets, it comes down to Amen. He is their guy. They believe in him for a reason. And so when he turned it around, and, I asked Ime Udoka post-game after game 5 how he was able to get going, if there was a turning point. And, Ime pointed to better spacing, which, to your point, I think they figured out as the series moved along what they need to do so that it's not as vanilla when he attacks a big downhill. I think we've seen at times the Warriors turn more to Quentin post types to try and not get out rebounded as much. Well, the trade-off there is that there's more bigs for someone like Amen to attack, and he's gotten more comfortable with that. But some of it's just as simple as seeing the ball go through the bucket. And I think, especially early in Game 5, when he had some drives that ended successfully, also got to the free throw line, made 8 of 9, that changes everything. I think they're above 80% in their wins this series from the free throw line, below 60% in the losses. That's a huge variable. But on top of Amen giving them a boost offensively for a team that is fairly mid on the offensive end of the court to begin with, I think it also gives him a little more juice defensively. We saw what he did against Steph Curry, ripping him several times. And honestly, from a Warriors perspective, it's Steph's performance that's been the big variable. In the 3 wins, he's averaged 28 points on better than 50% shooting. In the 2 losses, he's at 16% on below, or 16 points on below 40% shooting. So Amen as the primary guy on Curry, not only does his offense help the Rockets in their weakest area as a team, but I also think it gives him that extra competitive edge to go at Steph Curry on the other end. And so it sort of chips away at Golden State's biggest strength as well. And so I think getting peak Amen Thompson, that's what the Rockets did not have in the first 3 games of this series. They started getting it in Game 4, almost stole the game because of it. They got it in Game 5. And if they have it again in Game 6, I think they'll have a decent chance.
Coming up, what do we need to see from the Rockets in Game 6? We're going to get into some predictions and expectations for what is hopefully not the final game of this series between these two teams. We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Do you ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, entertainment costs, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So you stop just managing your money and you can start building your wealth. Managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off of your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNBA for half off your first year. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. All right, Ben, with Game 6 on the horizon here, I think about, what potential changes or adjustments or something that the Rockets could do, going into Game 6. And I think back to something that Fred said post game after Game 5, and he was like, we didn't change anything. We just did what we do better. Right. Largely, I think that's true to an extent. I get like flashbacks to like MDA saying like sometimes shots don't go in, and I hate that being the answer sometimes. Yeah, but sometimes that is just the answer. Sometimes the shots do just need to fall, and once they start falling, things just look completely different. I don't think necessarily that there's anything different or better that they could be or should be doing defensively. I think defensively, they've been really solid through all 5 games. And the largest variable has been offensively for them. And unfortunately, this has been kind of the talking point. I know you just made the point in segment 1, right, that Amen Thompson, more important to the team's success maybe than Jalen Green. But Jalen Green does feel like the biggest offensive variable, right? Where if you get a game like Game 2, Jalen Green, Rockets will coast and they will look fantastic. But if you get the games from Jalen like Games 1 and 4, or even Game 3, where the defense was geared to take everything away from Jalen, and he did put his teammates in positions to be successful in those games, the 4-on-3 power plays for Amen and for Sengun, and those guys were just unable to kind of capitalize on those opportunities. If you don't get a decent scoring game from Jalen, I do think it puts a lot of pressure on other guys to step up and score the ball. And thankfully in Game 5, right, Fred was sensational, just on fire from beyond the arc, getting it done in a variety of ways, scoring the ball. Dillon was fantastic with his scoring outbursts in that game. The Rockets can get their scoring from elsewhere, but you kind of almost expect that those guys aren't going to necessarily deliver back-to-back big scoring performances like that. Or maybe they will. Maybe Fred is just, he's settled into a groove, right? He really struggled, first 2 or 3 games of the series, and then Games 4 and 5, he's literally outplayed Steph Curry in Games 4 and 5 of this series.
So when we talk about Game 6, let's address the elephant in the room off the top, which is what happens if Scott Foster makes a wrestling type appearance
Oh my God.
at Chase Center and comes in to save the day.
He's going to come into like Triple H's music or something at Chase Center.
And
oh my God.
I mostly kid, but look, I do not think the Rockets are going to get a friendly whistle in this game. I think, say what you will, you can call it conspiracy theory if you want, but the Lakers losing to the Timberwolves, a Warriors-Timberwolves series would be much better for business than Rockets-Timberwolves. Let's just be honest. And the Warriors have much higher level talent, identifiable stars than the Rockets do. Names like Steph Curry, Jimmy Butler, Draymond Green. Those throughout the entire history of the NBA tend to get a friendlier whistle in tight spots, especially when they're playing at home and you have 18,000 screaming fans who are going to be yelling at the Rockets for breathing near Steph Curry in this game. So call it a conspiracy theory if you want, but I am very wary of how that game in San Francisco is going to be officiated. So with that in mind, I think it's especially important for at least one of your three perimeter creators, that's Jalen Green, Fred VanVleet, and Dillon Brooks, to have a big night. Because while I love Alperen Sengun and Amen Thompson, I am especially wary of whether the Rockets are going to get calls near the bucket. I think we saw this, especially in Game 3, which turned very ragged in the second half. The Rockets were trying to attack downhill, and they just were not getting calls near the rim. And even though Alperen Sengun scored 31 points and nearly won that game in Game 4, it took him 28 shots. It wasn't like he was just getting a friendly whistle throughout the game. And so because of that, I think it's tough, especially when you look at how the Rockets are probably going to need to win this game. And I just think it's doubtful that they're going to be able to blow the Warriors out. I think the Warriors are going to look at Game 6 as the one they need to win. I don't think this is a situation like the Kings series 2 years ago. People love to throw that out as an analog, and the Warriors actually lost a home Game 6, a chance to close it out, before winning on the road in Game 7. Steph Curry dropped 50. I don't think that's a good parallel for this series at all. Steph Curry is not going to drop 50 against Amen Thompson in this Houston defense. Clip me, mean me if I'm wrong, but I don't think that's going to be the case. I think, especially seeing how Houston has dominated this series really ever since the midway point of the third quarter in Game 1 at home, I think everyone involved knows that if it goes back to Houston for a Game 7, while nothing is a given, you can have an 0 of 27 shooting stretch, crazy things can happen. The Rockets should win a home Game 7. So the Warriors are going to lay it all on the line. They're probably going to have a friendly whistle. And so because of that, I don't think the Rockets are going to be able to win by, 15, 20 points. I'd love it if they do, but you take that as a pleasant surprise. The Rockets have shown an ability to do that in Houston. They have not shown an ability to do that in San Francisco. So if the Rockets are going to win this game, they're going to need to do it by executing in the final 6-7 minutes, the exact thing they have not been able to do in the 3 losses in this series. And as much as I love Sengun and Amen Thompson, it's going to be tough for them to do it individually because of the fouling issue and because of the NBA's propensity, except for Dillon Brooks against Jimmy Butler, to let more contact go down the stretch of these games. And so because of that, I think you're going to need at least one of your 3 perimeter guys, Fred, Jalen, and Dillon, to get going, have a strong night. That's what worries me. Did the Rockets waste the big Fred game on the road the other night when he had, 8 threes on peak efficiency, almost 30 points? Did they need to win that game in order to get to 4 wins, get the road win that they need to overcome that Game 1 home loss? That sort of nags at me in the back of my mind. Hopefully Fred has just figured it out. If not, maybe Dillon has another big game. Maybe Jalen is due. I think, one of the things, Jalen got off to a good start in Game 5, but he was limited by the knee. And so we'll see how he recovers. I'm sure he's icing it on Thursday's off day, but at least one of those trio of perimeter guys needs to have a big game, and especially down the stretch, because I just think the way the game's going to be officiated, and with Draymond in particular, I think he's going to lay his body on the line in this game, perhaps go over the line in a few cases. It would not shock me. We know how Draymond is. Someone from the perimeter is going to have to land the plane for the Rockets. I don't know if it's going to be Fred, Jalen, or Dillon, but I suspect it needs to be one of them.
Yeah, and I think that, you look back at especially like Game 3 in Golden State, right? Dillon, with all the foul trouble that he dealt with in that game, he's been such an
half-court guy.
I've discussed this before. Dillon's offense is more important than his defense is at this stage for this Rockets team. And so not having him out there on the floor for any extended period, any extended stretch in a game really hurts them offensively from a spacing perspective, from a scoring perspective. Dillon has been very reliable in the minutes that he's been on the floor this series. It's just, dealing with fouls and, getting played, and not played off the court, but, just being stuck on the bench because of those fouls has been problematic at times for Dillon. I will say I'm in full agreement with you. They need one of those three guys to show up, and generally, and the part with Dillon though is he's not a primary ball handler like the other two.
Right.
So his offense is still dependent largely at times on either recognizing the mismatches, right, where he can go at Steph Curry or a smaller player on the Warriors, get to some of those post ups like we saw in Game 5, or playing over the top of the defense when he gets those passes from Alperen Sengun. So that helps, but it's again, his shot diet is fully reliant on somebody else generating like a drive and kick or a double team down low from Alp, and then you get the kick out pass, and then he starts knocking down those threes. It's going to come down to Jalen or Fred to me, right? You need one of those two guys to step up and have a big game. And I'm right there with you. I really hope that Fred didn't empty too much of the clip in Game 5, that he saved a little bit. I need him to be like the Vince Carter, like Bleacher Report graphic, right? Like, I got one more in me. That's what I need from Fred VanVleet or Jalen Green, honestly. And that's where, like, I feel like
the only pushback I would give you, I do think that Sengun and Amen can initiate more, and they have initiated more as the series has progressed. So I see your point on Dillon not being a guy who, for the most part, is going to create offense on his own. But I do think that Sengun and Amen, especially if they get going early in Game 6, can do a little bit of the heavy lifting. It's just going to come down to who can make tough shots outside of your top two.
You're right. No, and I think for more or less, right, you look at the body of work in this series so far, Sengun has been good to great to excellent in 4 of the 5 games, right? And in the 2 games where he wasn't doing the heavy lifting scoring wise, Games 2 and Games 5, he was facilitating, he was rebounding, he was defending at a high level, he was doing a lot of other things besides just ball and hoop. And so you could get either version of Alperen Sengun. And in fact, I think the Rockets are a deadlier team when you get the versions of Sengun from Games 2 and 5, because generally that means he's facilitating, he's getting other guys involved. We saw how fluid the Rockets offense looked in Game 5. And a large part of that was Alperen Sengun, who had 8 assists at halftime, right? Just getting everybody involved, getting great little kickouts for wide open shots, little DHO actions to get shooters wide open. And obviously some of it's just the shots got to go in, right? But those opportunities are there. And when the Rockets are able to capitalize on them, things look really, really good offensively. So I think it's going to come down to this could be, I'm not going to say it's a Jalen Green legacy game, but this is going to be like Jalen, show us what you got, right? Like he balled out in Game 2. He was okay with what he was supposed to do in Game 3. He really struggled in Games 1 and 4. And then in Game 5, like to your point, right? And I talked about this in the recap pod, it looked like he was on his way to a good Jalen Green game, right? It looked like he came out with the right intensity, the right aggression, the right mentality, and then bumped knees with Steph Curry and got sidelined. And then, by the time he returned, everybody else was still rolling, firing on all cylinders. And he didn't really, I appreciate that he didn't try to insert himself and force the issue. Mm-hmm. He just kind of let the game progress naturally. And the Rockets were fine in the end. Yeah.
Yeah. They were in front throughout the game, so he didn't really need to. But yeah, Game 6 without that edge, and I find it hard to believe they're going to be leading by 20, 30 points the way they were for most of Game 5. Yeah, you're probably going to need him to do a little bit more of the heavy lifting when it comes to creation.
Coming up, predictions and final expectations for Rockets Warriors at Game 6. We're going to get there in just one moment. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Ben, we just talked about, or I just brought up, right, the importance of Dillon Brooks offensively for this team, but I can't help but feel like, things have been so heated between these two teams, and there's been, these little fights and altercations and all this, and nobody would have thought Pat Spencer would have been the first guy ejected this series, right? Like if you could have gotten betting odds on that, like plus 10,000 to 1 or, my bad, Cam
from
Spencer.
The broadcast,
I apologize, Cam Spencer. But there's a part of me that just wonders, if it comes to a point where Dillon Brooks and Draymond Green are getting into it, and there's an opportunity for Dillon to incite Draymond, even if he knows that they're both going to get kicked out of the game, I think Dillon takes that opportunity 11 out of 10 times. And I don't know. I'm not sitting here saying, I think Dillon is going to game plan to try and get Draymond Green kicked out, but it also wouldn't surprise me, right? Like if Draymond gets the first tech, early in the game, complaining about a call or whatever, all it takes is one altercation with Dillon Brooks. If he can get things escalated enough to a point, getting inside Draymond's head, that unfortunately for Dillon, right? Draymond is more important to what the Warriors do functionally across the board than Dillon is to what the Rockets do. There are other guys that can replicate some of what Dillon does up and down the roster, whereas there is not a single player on Golden State's roster that can do the things that Draymond Green does. So in a total vacuum, if Dillon can somehow incite Draymond Green and get him kicked out of the game, get him thrown out, and he himself also gets thrown out, that is an overwhelming win for the Rockets. And I've seen a lot of like Rockets fans on social media, they're like painting the picture of like how the 3-1 comeback looks, right? Like blow them out in game 5, protect home court. Game 6, Draymond Green gets ejected. Rockets take the win, come back, close it out in game 7. Like I'm not saying it's going to happen, but like I feel like we're bound for maybe a Draymond Green blow up at some point, and maybe it happens here in game 6.
Maybe. And you're right. I mean, he is way more important to the Warriors than Dillon is to the Rockets. And that's not a shot at Dillon. It just speaks to, especially in the wins and these games that are grinders, which is the Golden State formula. Houston has a little bit more upward mobility, which is crazy to say, given that the Warriors have Steph and Jimmy. But with the depth the Rockets have and their ability to defend in waves, I think it's the Rockets. When they hit shots the way they did in game 5, the Rockets have a gear that I don't think the Warriors can hit. For the Warriors to win, they need to grind it out in this series, especially with Steph and Jimmy limited to some extent by injuries. And now Jalen's got one of his own, but I mean, join the club. That happens over a competitive 7-game series. It's just a matter of who can play through it the most. And, you know, I'm sure Jalen's taking time off and icing it and doing whatever he needs to do. Yeah, it really bothered me, by the way, after game 3, the comment from Jalen about, you know, Draymond's talking because that's all he can do, or however he phrased it. No, he's not just talking. Draymond's been a phenomenal defender in this series. And if you take him out, then the entire calculus changes. When I said in the last segment, talking about how difficult it will be for Alperen Sengun or Amen Thompson to land the plane, in part because of the iffy officiating, but also the rim protection of the Warriors, it speaks to Draymond Green, his ability to defend multiple spots on the floor, to go vertical without fouling. He is such a presence near the rim that it's tough for that formula alone, especially in high leverage moments where they let more contact go, to win you a game. So, yeah, I'm right there with you. If you can get Draymond kicked out, you do it, because it would dramatically improve your chances of getting that road win that you need. The other guy, in terms of key variables for game 6 that I'm going to be watching, is Steven Adams. So there's going to be a lot made over the hours leading up to game 6 of the fact that the Warriors, because of the blowout in game 5, got some rest for marquee players. Guys like Draymond and Steph and Jimmy only played, you know, low to mid 20s in minutes. Well, the counter to that, I think Steven only played 18 for the Rockets, and he might not even have played in the second half at all. If he did, it was very brief because of the score. The Rockets went to Jock Landale largely as their backup center, and then, of course, they brought back the starters in the fourth quarter when the Warriors made that mini run that cut it to, 15 or whatever it was. A fresh Steven Adams is so important, especially on the road, because with the difficulty in finishing near the rim against Draymond Green with a tough whistle, not getting the free throw edge, the Rockets got 38 free throws in game 5 to 22 for the Warriors. I think it'd be silly to expect an advantage that large in game 6 for a multitude of reasons. So a lot of your ability to succeed is going to come down to the extra effort plays, the second, third possessions, because you pound the offensive glass. The Warriors actually out-rebounded the Rockets by a lot in game 5. I think that's largely an outlier because the Rockets just didn't miss many shots, period. And so they didn't have to turn to the tried and true offensive rebounding formula that's been a big part of their half-court offense this season. On the road in game 6 against a fully dialed-in Warriors team that's going to approach it like their season is on the line, in my opinion, you're probably going to need those extra effort plays. And so Steven Adams being able to get you second and third chances, that's a big deal. If you need to play him 30 minutes to get out of San Francisco with a win, do it. It's going to be a physical, chippy game, and that's made for Steven Adams. Also, when we talk about getting someone like Fred and Jalen going, it comes down to physicality. It comes down oftentimes to setting the right screens. That's where Steven Adams is so critical to the guard's success as well. So I think Steven's going to be big for the Rockets in this game. But then the question that comes with that, if the Rockets need to close with Steven Adams to finally get over the hump in a tight game in the fourth quarter, who is he part of the closing lineup in place of? Who do they bench to facilitate that? I don't know the answer to that. It could be Jalen. It could be Dillon. I guess there's a small chance it could be Fred, but probably not. I think, Fred's just one of those guys that's in the innermost circle of the circle of trust. And so I think Ime will ride him no matter what. But I do think there's a world where the Rockets need Steven Adams, and even if they're afraid of the Warriors hacking him, even if you might hurt the feelings of someone like Jalen or Dillon, whoever it may be, to free up that spot in the closing five for Steven Adams. I think you may just have to bite the bullet and do it. Because if game 6 plays out the way I expect it to, both from the standpoint of getting at least one of those guards going and in a chippy game, getting multiple opportunities, crashing the offensive glass, I think this needs to be a Steven Adams game, and Ime Udoka needs the courage to finish with him if that's what the circumstances warrant.
Yeah, not even just the offensive side of things, right? But the defensive side.
Sure.
Warriors really hurt the Rockets in games 3 and 4. Beating them in the second chance points department. And there were moments in both of those games where like Adams was on the floor doing everything he does around the glass, both sides, right? Offensively, but especially on the defensive side. And Rockets get a, good defensive possession. They force a Warriors miss. And then Adams is able to clean up the glass, or he's getting, 2 or 3, 1 or 2 bodies focused on him. And he's able to, just kind of delete those guys that are going after offensive rebounds.
That was the game 1 comeback as well.
Yeah, and he comes out of the game, and then suddenly the Rockets are unable to secure some of those defensive rebounds near the end of a game where everybody's exhausted and tired and playing on dead legs. And for Adams, having him out there, he's by far been the most singularly most impactful player in this series for either team, which is kind of insane to think about. Here's a couple on-off numbers for Steven Adams in this series. With Steven Adams on the floor, Houston's rebounds percentage is 61.5%. Golden State's rebound percentage is 38.5%, and Houston's offensive rebound percentage is 46.8%. Those are all the numbers with Adams on the floor. Without Adams on the floor, the Rockets' rebound percentage drops to 47.9%, so about a 14% drop there. Golden State's rebound percentage jumps up about 14 points, 52.1%, and then the offensive rebound percentage drops about 15, almost 16 points down to 31.3%. I to your point about the closing lineup, I feel like Adams and Sengun have just been so dominant with each other in this series. They have a plus 32.2 net rating in 54 minutes played together so far this series. They've been incredible together. And the Rockets' defense, their offense, it's all looked phenomenal when those two guys are on the floor. The only question has been, how much further can you push them, right? Can you play them in some of the Steph Curry minutes, right? Or is Steph going to kill you when they're out there? Largely, they've been able to hold their own. I think they've figured things out with that zone defense. And to your point about the closing lineup, I think the closing lineup is almost like painfully obvious at this point, where you go with Fred, Dillon, Sengun, Adams, and it's that fifth guy who becomes the question mark for me. You can say it's Amen Thompson because of how locked in he's been, on both sides of the basketball. If he's having a good Amen Thompson game, right? If he looks again like end of game 4, all of game 5, then he absolutely should be the one on the floor. But you could also make a case for potentially Jabari Smith Jr. for the floor spacing purposes, the extra length defensively. I think that Dillon and Fred are a must. LP is a must to have out there. And Adams might be a must, right? Like that's kind of the crazy thing. I was shocked to see Ime actually go fully away from Steven Adams in game 4 with the threat of, the hack Adams strategy. I honestly, with how poor the Rockets offense was to close that game, they would have been better off just letting Steven Adams shoot free throws.
Agree. And you didn't mention Jalen Green, but hopefully if he has the type of game that he's capable of, like he did in game 2, then he forces his way into that equation as well. And then the other part of playing with Steven, you leave yourself a little bit vulnerable. Sometimes role players shoot better at home. That's an adage for a reason when it comes to NBA playoff basketball. And, if Pods or Buddy Hield, someone like that has a huge game, maybe Quentin Post, then they shoot their way out of it. But at this point, if that happens, I think you just sort of got to shrug your shoulders and say, they deserve to win, and we had our opportunities and we blew them. I think Steven Adams for the series as a whole has done enough. He is your guy. I mean, the numbers do not lie. When you see the vast differential when he's on the court and when he's off more than any other player, I think you've got to ride him unless, he's just really struggling in that game. And if a non-Curry shooter like Pods or Buddy Hield, someone like that sends you home, then it sucks. #Houston Sports, but it is what it is.
I think too, one thing that felt maybe a little bit different in game 5, not anything like that was like a major noticeable shift, but a big part of, the Warriors and their ball movement and trying to get the ball to their shooters, right? There's only a handful of like actual shooters on the Warriors roster that you have to worry about, right? You got to stay glued to Steph Curry. You can't lose Buddy Hield. Pods is, hit or miss here or there, but you treat him as a shooter as well. Everybody else outside of that, like gladly let them take the shots, right?
Well, Post is sort of in a middle ground. He's a good shooter, but he does have a little bit of a slow release, so you can recover on him a little bit easier than you could a Buddy Hield.
Post is a weird one. Post should be one of the ones that you close out, but he's also not. He literally can't do anything else other than shoot the three ball.
Yeah,
so
he's a huge defensive liability. So how much is he really going to play?
And he's also not a guy really with any much of a threat to attack off the bounce, that kind of thing. Sure. But I feel like the Rockets, especially when the Warriors had the trifecta of Jimmy Butler, Draymond Green, and GP2 out there at the same time in Game 5. Those are three guys who are all very hesitant three-point shooters, guys who do not want to pull the trigger, even when they're wide open from three. And I feel like the Rockets did a good job in Game 5 of making those guys be the ones to pull the trigger, making those guys be the ones to, helping off of those guys, understanding, okay, I can sag off this guy and help in the paint, or rotate over and make sure I'm up to touch on this guy. And get back in time, because this guy's he doesn't want to shoot that three, right? Jimmy Butler really struggled with his three ball in Game 5, just 0 of 3 from downtown, 2 of 10 overall shooting. And again, we don't know how much that injury is really plaguing him, but he didn't look like he was moving great in that game. Steph Curry as well, struggling. He had 11 points in the second quarter, but was really quiet outside of that. So I don't know. I'm feeling pretty confident heading into Game 6 based on how closely played the series has been up to this point. And I do think that outside of maybe some officiating mischief here, if the Rockets get a similar whistle to what they got in Game 5, it's over. But they're not going to get that whistle. They're not going to get 38 free throws. They'll be lucky to break 20 free throws in game 6, I think.
Look, logically, I want to say the Rockets should win this game. I think if I was a third-party fan, I might predict the Rockets to win, simply because I do believe in the old Daryl Morey adage of good teams don't win close games, they avoid them. And the Warriors have played with fire in this series. They have won all the coin flip games. They have not shown an ability to clearly outplay the Rockets. And so at some point, they should lose a close game. The bounces should go Houston's way. However, I'm going to be the resident pessimist, because at this point it feels like, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. The Rockets have had so many opportunities. The first 3 losses all basically had the same formula. They're right there for the taking midway through the fourth quarter. And especially the latter two, the Rockets had leads in San Francisco. They just did not have anyone that could land the plane. Golden State has at least one. And now that Jimmy Butler is back, 2 guys that are capable of doing that. I would love to be wrong. No one will be happier in the world than me if the Rockets can finally do it. But it just feels like a game that, again, the Rockets should be competitive. I don't see any scenario short of just a crazy outlier shooting night in either direction where the Rockets aren't competitive. But I also don't really see realistic scenarios where they win convincingly. I think it's a game that's there for the taking in the last 6 minutes. And as much as I hate it, there's a reason why we've talked about the Rockets not having that A1 all season long, that being a problem. The Warriors have 2 future Hall of Fame A1 type scoring options in Steph Curry and Jimmy Butler. I just have a hard time not picking the Warriors. Perhaps it's the hashtag Houston sports guy in me, but I just have a tough time seeing Steph and Jimmy not be able to figure out a way to get the game to the finish line. The one positive note I will end on, though, I do think if it comes back to Houston for a Game 7, this is not a Sacramento situation from 2 years ago. If it comes back to a home Game 7, I firmly believe the Rockets will win it.
Who will emerge as the Rockets' A1 steak sauce in Game 6 on the road in the Bay Area? We want your thoughts ahead of Game 6. Let us know your thoughts, feelings, worries, concerns, hopes, dreams, all of that in the YouTube comments. Let us know. Ben, let everybody know where to track you down at.
Yep, hashtag Blue Sky Ben. But all of my coverage, rocketswire.usatoday.com. That has not changed. We also got some video coverage on Twitter at the Rockets Wire.
That's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Rockets. As always, thanks so much for checking out the show. Remember, the best way to help us grow the show is to listen every single day on a podcast platform of your choosing. Like, comment, subscribe on YouTube. The comments help us out a ton. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.